Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to our webinar series, Embracing Change. Today, we have an incredible guest who's just finished her book, Lifetime to Legacy, and based in Austin, Texas now, but originally from Nigeria. Nike Anani, thank you very much for being with us today. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much for having me again. It's great to be back.
That's good. So it must be a relief, and at the same time kind of being like, oh, what are they going to say? Well, am I going to take the feedback well? Is it going to be is it going to hurt, or is it going to be okay? What's the feeling inside as you launch the book, just so people can get a grip on what it feels like? It's just
honestly a huge relief. Like, finally the baby is out into the world and the baby has its own breathing system. But also just a huge sense of pride that I made it to the end, because it took a lot of consistency, discipline, and hard work. And then finally hearing the feedback from people, what they thought, what the value they got from it as they read it, it's just been fantastic. It's only been a couple of weeks, but really enjoyed the book in the world thus far.
Okay, so that's amazing. So to everyone, I haven't had the honor and privilege to read it yet, so we're doing a bit of a cheat here in a certain manner, but I will be reading it. As you know, Nike, we want to do fun things together, so without reading it, there's no respect. And as you know, I'm working on my next book, and so I'm 8 days in the middle of kind of nowhere, but the people who love watches would know Le Brassus is where all the big watchmakers are. So that's where I am. And so let's get into this. So this is really a book about speaking about the future of family enterprise. So first, let's go very basic. Let's go back really down to the ground level. What does family enterprise mean? Like, what is it comprised of? And, is it different in different regions, different cultures or generations? Just give us a bit of a base of what we're talking about.
That's a really great question, foundationally. So family enterprise is just the enterprising activities that families engage in, whether it be entrepreneurial businesses, like operating businesses that they own, or investing activities in different sectors, whether it be property or liquid assets, or more venture capital, private equity, cryptocurrency, anything they're investing in, and or philanthropic activities through foundations, or even corporate social responsibility activities, perhaps through their operating businesses and what have you. And I'm very passionate about the role enterprising families play in not only in their businesses and their activities, because they are such they play such an anchoring role in these entities, but also in society and also in communities at large. And I think that enterprising families are like our unsung heroes. And how can we help them to take their activities from lifetime to legacy? So how can we ensure that these activities outlive the originators, the founders of these activities, such that we see sustained impact over time and also over space? And I guess all of this is very much colored by as I spoke about on the last time we had this conversation on the webinar, by my experience from Nigeria, where only 2% of businesses originated by founders would outlive these founders. And the motive of the book was to present the key success factors to build legacy enterprises and how folks can go about in doing so. And it aims to be a very practical book, not an academic book. There is a lot of, the case studies, and there's a lot of the data and what the academics are saying, but I'm a business owner, and I know business owners don't have time. Business owners want practical, actionable steps. Yeah. And that is what this book really gives. There's exercises that you can do. There's a workbook, an accompanying workbook, which you can work through with your family, should you choose to read it with your family, which I would actually recommend. And yeah, it's intended to not only give you a new perspective, but also give you tangible, actionable steps that you can take.
Okay, so I mean, you said a percentage of 2%. Okay, that's a pretty grueling number. I think that's lower than anything I've ever heard.
Yeah.
So did you write it with them in mind or in general in mind? Was it really more back home that, look, we really need to get our act together as Nigerians because this is getting a bit embarrassing? Or no, I mean,
Both. I mean, I do go deep on the Africa situation. So I do clarify, simplify, and elaborate like the conversation we had the last time. Like,
yeah,
what are the nuances on the African continent?
yeah,
What are our natural advantages? How can we improve upon that to move this needle on the 2%? But honestly, these key success factors in building legacy enterprises are applicable to any family anywhere. These really speak to the relational elements of the family, which I believe are foundational, not just the technical elements. And when I say relational, I'm talking about family governance, family conversations, family education, next generation development, coaching, leadership, and what have you, as opposed to tax planning, wealth planning, estate planning, and just strategic business planning. I really believe that the family has to be addressed as well as these technical elements. And so there's a lot of value that folks can derive from the book, regardless of where you're from or, where you operate, because these key success factors are universal. It's really ensuring that we create a platform through which we communicate and have conversations very deliberately, both on matters of the enterprise, but also matters of the family, and ensuring that we have good communication, good collaboration, and have joint clarity on what's the purpose of the enterprise, what are our values, what's the mission, what's the vision, and what's the compelling reason for us to stay together as an enterprising family. These are the important conversations. So there's value for folks that are not African, but also I think it's really interesting. I've had a few friends from Europe and the US that have read it, and they're like, oh my goodness, I learned so much about Africa from this. I found particularly there's a section, the uniqueness of the African history. A lot of folks have given me really good feedback about that section. So yeah, I'd say it's good value for anyone, really.
okay, so let's maybe get into, so first it rings music to my ears. As you know, we are all about the human capital, the family members, starting with the individual, then moving to the family itself. So I'm glad that there's a book bringing us back to for whom all this wealth, all this business, all this is being created for, which is the individual and the family themselves. So let's start. So okay, now let's start with the basics. I mean, you mentioned all the pieces. So let's go through the basic pieces, and then we'll go through from perspectives of next gen and existing gen, right? Because that will also be a different dynamic, right? In terms of how we approach this and some of the challenges that are occurring. So what are the pieces, the key pieces you feel are foundational for preparing for the future family enterprise, irrespective of whether we're going from first gen to second, second to third, third to fourth? I'm assuming it's universal, right? Without becoming institutional.
Indeed. Number one, clarity. Clarity. Where are we going? Who are we? How are we getting there? And I liken it to a family enterprise is like, where are we going? It's like we're getting in the car. We need to know where we're going, right? We need to know our destination. And we need to know how we're getting there, which route are we taking? And we need to know who we're going with as well. So who's coming along in this journey with us? So who's in the car? Who are...
or the bus.
Yeah, or the bus. Who are we saying get an Uber?
who we're asking to go in a separate car, huh?
Yeah, like this is not for you.
with a different destination, huh?
With a different destination, like we'll see you another day if we will.
Okay.
Because it's I think that's foundational. A lot of folks that I've come across don't invest enough time for this foundational, and it seems so simple, right? We always want to chase after the more complicated, very elaborate structures without to the expense of the simple. And so really spending time to gain collective clarity of what is the family purpose, what is the family vision, what is the family mission, and what are our values. And quite often it does entail each individual going on this journey individually. So what is Nikes? What do I want? What do I stand for? Yeah. Where am I heading in my life? And going deep and identifying that, and then having collective conversations to identify what are the commonalities between Nikia and Feisal? Like, what are the common values that we both treasure, to identify the family's shared values, shared mission, shared vision, and what have you. So that is number one, I would say. And a lot of that, my thinking around that was very much inspired by Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why.
Yeah.
I found that book such a powerful read. And in his book, he talks about how a lot of business leaders, ironically, don't start with why. They focus on the what and the how.
And the how. Yeah.
And he believes that the why is absolutely essential, and we need to drill deeper on purpose. And some people would even go as far as getting clarity on 5 levels of your why. So yes, you know, like asking, you seem to have a bit of experience in this.
The Japanese ask 5 times.
Yeah, like your deepest why. And I've done this exercise in the coaching class before, and I was just like, what do you mean go deeper? Like, this is why I want to do this.
With Robin, we did 50 times. And what we did was you sit knee to knee, eye to eye, and you ask a question, and you keep asking the same question. And you'll see that by the time you hit 10, 15, 20, that's when the truth starts to come out. So there's all this layering and layering, layering. And then many a times you'll start crying, you know, but you keep asking, and you're eye to eye contact, knee to knee, and you just keep going, you keep going, you keep going, you know, and, or just simple things. What do I want to hear? 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 So the why, the Japanese say 5, I think we can go a little further than the Japanese, but you know, 5 is a good start.
Wow. And you know, what's really interesting is that journey, it takes time. You have to be patient with yourself and give yourself and your family not only the physical time in the calendar to explore this, but the emotional space to go there, right? So quite often families that I've worked with in the past would say to me, yeah, develop a plan for the succession. Well, no, it's conversations with you. And, you know, and they're very busy, you know, putting out fires in the business and what have you. And that's absolutely great. I get it, because like I said, I'm a business owner as well, but it requires one to make the time in the calendar and the space emotionally to dig deeper as to why are we doing this. I will take you up on this challenge to ask myself this 50 times and see what comes out of it.
With any question, not just about this, anything. Yeah, you just keep journaling and you keep asking and you keep writing. But if you can do it with someone, it's even more powerful. But of course, someone you trust that's going to hold the space, be loving, be caring, be empathetic. And then, of course, you flip. So it's their turn too. So it's not a one-way exercise. But I love it. So you asked them to make time, and do they make time, or do you feel it's resistance? Is it excuses that we're busy, or are they genuinely like, what has your experience been when you ask them to do the individual work?
My experience is when we do the individual work, they see the value, and then they're more invested in coming together and banding together as a family. But typically, the next gen is a lot more curious towards this whole process and more invested emotionally than the founders. And I think the resistance is because of the fear of the inevitable, right? We're talking about succession, essentially, and we're talking about there's going to be a time when you're not in the room. I think that's that aversion towards, you know, truly acknowledging that reality. So the manner in which one has to approach this is with a lot of tact and mindful of the language one uses. Yeah. And also I try to reframe the conversation away from one of this inevitable event that will happen to one of more continuity. Yeah, exactly. So
continuity, longevity. Yeah, we don't use the word succession because it's too triggering.
Yeah. It's too painful and sore for them. So I like to start conversations around what legacy do we want to be leaving as a family and living as a family. So our living legacy and the legacy that we'll leave. And I think it softens the conversation a lot more, and it creates more willingness on the part of the founders.
So the next gen is more interested, excited, etc. The older gen is kind of apprehensive. So, but what I love is that you're going at the individual level. And this is what we've seen a lot, is that there's very little done at the individual level, and the majority of the work is at the family level. And as a result, there's not enough truth that's shared at the family level, or not enough preparation done to really know yourself and be clear and have your clarity before you come in. So if you don't have clarity, how you expect to create clarity as a coherent, family system, right? So it's the individual, then the family. So I love that. That's aligned. I'm sorry, I'm being selfish here. This is something that, we also do, as you know. Okay, so beautiful. And then, so when they come into the family side, what are you seeing? What are you experiencing?
So in the family side, typically I'm facilitating meetings, and usually it'll be the very first meeting, first productive meeting they've had. They may have had meetings in the past where the founder it's just like a monologue. It's almost like an update on, this is what's happening in the business, this is what's happening with the assets, this is where we're heading and what have you. But there's never really been an inclusive culture where voices matter. And here's the interesting thing about the next generation. They're a generation where if they don't feel like they can contribute and make an impact, or they matter, they will just leave the space, whether literally leave or emotionally. They just shut down. And they're not interested. And a lot of the time, we have a lot of folks that talk about next generation engagement is an issue. And I've been in meetings where someone said, oh, well, the reason why the next generation are not really engaged in family enterprise matters because they don't have it in them. They don't have the entrepreneurial drive like their parents do, because they've grown up in affluence and they tend to be a lot more entitled. And I was like, I beg to differ. I have completely different perspective.
Being next gen.
Being a next gen, and through the privilege I've had of coaching many a next gen, quite often it's as a result of the founder not letting go. And so it stifles their ability to grab on. And where they feel their voices are not honored, they leave, metaphorically. And so that's the issue. So how to create that inclusive culture where voices matter, where not one person dominates, where we're united, but we don't, we have unity, right? We might not have uniformity of perspectives, but we hear the perspectives of all the different people in the room to co-create ideas, our joint ideas on the future of the enterprise, the purpose, the mission, the values. So that's what I'm often grappling with, is going from this very much informal system of decision-making to more institutional and more inclusive, including the next generation and spouses as well.
Have you found also that coaching the next gen is also very, very important for that process, not only to be patient, also to be, in terms of how they also present, right? Because there's also this judgment that comes in from their side that's very painful for some of the founders, right? Because they did their best at that moment in time for the decisions they made based on their level of consciousness, right? You were not there. The context is not always understood because they weren't there themselves. Decisions were made where today would be different, but you did your best, and maybe you did some things that, you're not so proud of anymore, right?
1000%. I find I call my coaching sessions a sacred space. That sacred space, just so beautiful, because I'm able to not only validate next gens with what they're feeling, but also give them a different perspective with how their parents are seeing things and how and why they may have done things, and just to come at the founders with a lot more empathy and grace. And like you said, every parent is doing their best. 98% of parents are trying their absolute best, because they love their children, and they may be limited with the resources they have, whatever, however you want to define resources, or the context is really key. So a lot of the coaching is around gaining deep empathy for founders, and also around moving from questioning founders and being this critic to asking questions and being a champion. And so the nature of communication I coach them through that, and also encouraging them to listen. It's hard. It's hard when you feel like you've got all this like emotions bottled up in you with respect to not only the enterprise. I disagree with how he's doing A, B, C, and how she's doing that, but also a lot of next gens have a lot of pain with respect to feeling that their parents chose the business over them, right? And not feeling like they really had a stab at a solid relationship with their parents. And so there's a lot to process all that, those wounds and that trauma. It's definitely not just because I'm a next gen coach doesn't mean that I'm not able to guide my next gens when I feel that they're not being fair, or they're taking on perspectives or patterns that are not helpful for their evolution and for the evolution of the family enterprise. In a weird way, I'm also a founder as well. So I'm founder of several businesses with my husband. So I empathize with founders on the other side and the issues that they're grappling with. Getting next gens getting any stakeholder to suspend judgment. Try to gain understanding of the perspective, the priorities, the preferences, and the personalities of the other person. And then trying to communicate to them appropriately in a language that they understand is essentially one of the key objectives of my coaching sessions.
I agree 100%. I mean, the book I'm writing is really about the yin and yang of me and we. And the key is the state of being, which is, are we showing up with imposition, expectation, and judgment? And it's all directions, up, down, sideways, it's in spousal, sibling, uncle, niece. So it's all every direction. And it's taking accountability for that, but also remembering perspectives, context, trying to understand where they are in their stage of life, in their stage of human development. So it's really a deep exercise before we can truly have a coherent conversation, but more importantly, make that that plan, as you mentioned, of the why and the how and the what as a family, right? So if I haven't healed my childhood traumas of family business first, I'm second, you travel, this, that, whatever it is, then, my conversation is skewed. Let's be honest, right? Because I'm probably going to react. I'm probably not going to listen 150%. I'm probably not going to, so it's that individual space is, paramount, which I love that you're taking the time on all generations, I'm assuming, not just next gen, of course, even though you love the next gen, quote unquote. Okay, so we've done that exercise, and then what? What's the next step?
So typically then we look at siblings. So now banding together as siblings team, how can we move from just being siblings to being partners? And understanding the distinction between, we know what it's like to be siblings. We've probably been siblings for 30 plus years. Nike is the responsible one. Feisal is mummy's boy. And, so-and-so is the favorite one. But how do we now start? What does it mean to be partners with respect to family enterprise? And what is between the siblings? What is our shared mission, our shared vision, and our shared values? And how do we want that to show up in our collaboration? And typically, a lot of folks have said to me, but why do we need to be working on this now? Mom or dad is still in power, so to speak, controlling founder. But I believe that, moving from sibling to being business partners takes time. It takes investment. Firstly, to get to know yourself, to know your strengths, your weaknesses, your interests, and the role you'd like to play. and also to know that of your other siblings as well, and banding together and meshing together. Also, it's also very helpful when you come together as siblings during the lifetime of the founder and start to demonstrate this unity and start to demonstrate that you're not just nagging, criticizing, but you're able to come together and make business decisions. So you can start small with a small project, whether it be a philanthropy project or investing in something, but showing the older generation that, oh, okay, they're not nagging, they're not criticizing, but they're making very professional points, and they're working really well together. They're submitting a perspective that I never ever thought about. It does help with the letting go, grabbing on phenomenon. So yeah, siblings teams partnership is something that we work on as well as understanding each other's roles, strengths, weaknesses, and the project that we're working on. Conflict resolution is a big one. Understanding where does conflict come from? What part can I play to minimize or repair conflict? When do we know that we need to bring somebody else into the room to help us with this, and what have you? So that's usually where we end up at. Siblings teams. It's a huge piece.
And what about the labels that you started with of me being mommy's boy? How do you move through that? Because that plays a part in how we communicate, how we, our perspectives of each other. So how do you move through that piece?
That's through the individual work. So really, you were talking about the me and the we, and you were talking about suspending judgment, and also I believe it's also towards oneself. So having self-compassion. So firstly, I know I have trauma that I'm holding on to that colors the way I see myself, and it colors the way I see others. And also trying to understand that the next person also is the same. So I may say that my brother, for instance, is dad's favorite, but in confidence in that sacred space with a coach, trying to understand where does that label from? How does that color the way I see my brother when we're working together? And what's a more empowering narrative that I can apply towards him, so I can come at him with more compassion, empathy, and I'm willing to collaborate. So, I'm really excited about your book. I want to read it because I think it's so integral, the me and the we. It's just this never-ending, continuous circle, right? Between the me,
the infinity loop.
Yeah. And so in the work that we do, just it's so important to have that sacred space individually with folks, but also then coalesce and bring them together to start to mesh together.
Okay, amazing. So I see that the foundational work is really rock solid before. So it's now the family. Now we've gone to siblings. Okay, partnership. Then what?
Yeah. So we facilitate meetings with the wider family. Usually, like I said, it's usually the first meeting that they've ever had on what is going on. Firstly, trying to gain clarity of the actual activities of the enterprise, and then also what do we want? What's our role on like in-laws, for instance, which is a really tricky topic in our industry. As you know, what are our values and what's our vision, what's our mission? And then these are conversations that are not done in an hour. These are very lengthy conversations, and we may switch from the very technical to the very relational at times. And the essence is really to train the family to understand how to run a family meeting. My job is done when families understand the ground rules that they need, how to enforce ground rules, how to have productive conversations, how to be able to follow up with whatever action points they decided on, how to make space for one another and honor one another's views. And my objective is really to be eased out and brought in for, I guess, very specific work where they need my expertise rather than just bringing folks in a room to have a meeting. So that's usually the life cycle of my engagements. It starts from next gen one-on-one with siblings, mixture of one-on-ones and group work, and then the whole family and ease out.
Okay. So in the book, obviously, to build this family enterprise of the future, you've got this first step, you've got the second step. Are there other steps? What are the next steps that you describe in building out the family enterprise?
So I was advised, and I think it was really good advice, when I was writing this book. I was trying to write 5 books in one. And I
okay.
I had to dig deep on what is it that my audience is really struggling with, and what will be the 80-20 rule, what would be the most impactful for where they're at, so I don't overwhelm them. And so the essence of the book is really to build a case for why it's important to come together as families, and also to dig deep individually. And so the goal is having your family meeting. So that's where it starts at. Perhaps yesterday I was challenged to write another book, and I was like, I'm just recovering from the labor process.
Recovering.
I'm still recovering from.
It's like you just gave birth.
Postpartum. Hey, I haven't had my 6-week checkup, and you're talking about, oh, when's the next one coming? I'm like looking at him like, what are you talking about?
That's why it's a him. That's why it's a him.
Of course it's a him, because he doesn't understand what it's like to push. And so I was like, let's get this baby to be like 2, and then we can talk about, then we can start thinking, okay, I kind of miss, that phase of life. But I do think there's a lot more secondary conversations. And I think your book sounds like something I need to read as well.
Okay. So, I mean, when, our biggest, I would say, challenge that we see in a family meeting is being in truth. Right? Like you said, creating the space, allowing perspectives and all of that. I think at a sibling level, or at least at the same generational level, it may be easier. But when it's multi-generational, without, and again, you don't want to be, the flower or the fruit in the room unnecessarily. We find it's a little more challenging. Right? Are you seeing that, or are you able to really take space and allow, and they're able to continue from there and be in truth, not just tick the boxes?
Yeah, it is challenging, because but I think we have to give grace to families, because this is an area that is very new to them. And they've never been in truth with one another in such a vulnerable fashion, because we're not just talking about which countries you want to expand in the business. We're also talking about emotional stuff. Like, I'm really scared that when dad dies, what's going to happen? Like, or I'm really worried about, Faisal's just got him married, and like, what's going to happen? What's our view on his spouse? Like, and, these are really tricky conversations, I think. So it's giving the families also grace to, it's like riding a bike. The first time you get on a bike, you'll be a bit shaky, you may fall off, but it takes time before you then start, you're riding with ease, and you're able to multitask, you're able to listen to a podcast, maybe you're able to look at the sights whilst you're riding. But initially you're just like, what in the world is this? So uncomfortable. So I think it's giving grace to them, and then also ground rules are helpful. So really encouraging them to own their perspectives and not try and speak on behalf of someone else. And also be mindful of the power dynamics that play in the room, which typically the founding generation typically will want to speak more, because they've been used to always directing board meetings and business meetings, and of course it's a family meeting. So, but no, it's unity, not uniformity. We don't necessarily just want one voice. We want a united voice. So we want to hear different voices in the room. So I think it does take time for them to get used to it. And I think the private work helps as well. Having sessions with each person one-on-one, and getting them to understand the purpose of the meeting, getting them to understand the importance of them bringing their full selves. Starting to iron out any kinks they may have. There may be issues, right? Dynamic issues that maybe stopping them from bringing their full selves to the room, and trying to work on those privately, so that collectively we can have a productive, real, authentic conversation.
So you are clearing some of the air on a pair basis or on a, you know, son, mother, daughter, father, whatever the combinations are and permutations, that's also being done in preparation for this incredible family meeting.
I usually just do one-on-one. So I have
Okay.
check-ins with each family member. I've not
Okay.
done, and then I also, like I said, do siblings meetings. There've been a couple of instances where I've had to recommend a licensed therapist. Say there's issues of mental health disorders or addiction, things that whilst I'm very well versed in holding space, I'm not necessarily a licensed therapist. I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not. I'm just a coach. So there may be need to have someone with specialist expertise to help them work through some very specific issues. But yeah, no, usually it's one-on-one with each family member to prep them, to get their perspective, to understand them better, to iron through any kinks or issues, and then bringing them together to have a productive conversation.
Wow. So basically the preparation and the family meeting is what you're saying is the focus of the book, and you feel this is the 80-20. That preparation and that ability to be coherent, to be in truth, to share perspective, to really, that's, you feel, will allow for the turning point of things to change and to create lifetime legacy and
it's the foundation. It is the ultimate foundation, not just the councils, the committees like we spoke about, and not just the estate plans, not the tax plans, not the wealth plans. It's getting the families to get into a cadence and a rhythm of firstly being vulnerable and authentic with themselves and with each other, and being able to explore and co-create ideas together. That is the foundation.
Okay, and then how, I mean, so as they build this, right? So what do you see? I mean, okay, you've this is the 80%. What's the 20%? Does the 20% really take you to the next level, or is this 80 already enough because succession is already so challenged statistically? And do you see anything different if it's first to second, second to third, third to fourth? Are you seeing any differences that you need to create in terms of the family meeting, I guess, preparation?
So the 20% is things like starting a family board. So, getting very organized with the governance, starting a family governance as well, the councils and the committees, or structural things like starting a family office and, deciding on the successor, preparing the successor. Those are the areas where we typically will move on into like an implementation phase. The purpose of a family meeting is to identify firstly, gain collective clarity on what we want, what we stand for, but also identify key strategic priorities of the enterprise based on each person's lens and the perspective through which they see things. And then we can move into an implementation phase. Interesting question with respect to different generations. I've only worked with G1 to G2. Haven't done much work G2 to G3. I would anticipate it's a lot more complicated because then you've got more family members, cousins that may not have ever grown up in the same household with different values. So you've got to reconcile different values. And I would assume there's more geographic dispersion by that point, potentially less engagement from the next generation, more issues of grappling with tradition versus innovation. And so, yeah, those are the issues that I would assume would be coming through, but the process would be the same. Now, the issue I would also foresee is one of budget. So obviously this is not, it's time consuming. You have to meet with each family member and then bring everyone together. How do you do this in such a way that obviously families firstly don't have time, they're time constrained, not just the founders, the next generation typically are in a phase of life where professionally and also personally, they may be bringing up their next generation. And also budget is also a factor. So ensuring that we do this in a very efficient way from a cost perspective and a budget perspective is is key to really serving these families optimally.
Yeah, because once you go into the next gens, there's representation. There's people representing that branch or that piece or that, that space. And then what happens, what we start to see is those who are active versus inactive. There's a more, there's more voice in these meetings of the active ones, even though they say this is a business meeting and this is a family meeting, right? They separate the two, right? But you still see that the weight, I'm saying without an outsider in the room, because when you listen to those, as you said, are doing it independently, and you listen to the conversations that are being had, there's not much real conversations about challenges with children, about, challenges happening on a relational level, right? On a spousal level, on, a parental level. You see, so those are what are real, things that are taking away and creating leakage, right? How do we support each other, or how do I get support on those pieces? So when I hear of the family meetings, I'm not hearing as much of the true cracks that are needing to be addressed, but are not being addressed, right? So that's why I was asking, because there's representation. Then there's fear. If it's bloodline only, we hear a lot of fear of the spouses that are married in, right? The children are protected, but they are not, right? So the conversation then is, okay, how do we do that? But I hear it on an individual level. I've even dealt with it, child to parent, but that conversation is not happening in the family meeting, because if it's impacting one person, for sure it's impacting many others, but they're too scared to open a can of worms, right? Because they say, no, it's at the individual level. Let them basically figure it out, which is, yes, fair, but at least we can learn from each other. We can, lead by example. Because if I'm the leader of the business, I can also lead by example as to, okay, I understand there's fears coming in. The next gen is very egalitarian, quote unquote, right? I mean, and so I'm just asking about those pieces. Like, are you seeing that the family meetings are really, we can say, juicy? You know what I mean? Like, not sitcom juicy, but the real deal.
I think it's the work of the facilitator to really prepare and get each person comfortable to really bring out all these issues. And I think it's also the work of the facilitator to not, it's hard to just want to give in to whatever your client wants, but also to challenge them. And really, the focus is the good of the enterprise. And if the good of the enterprise requires that we have a conversation on certain matters, if we bring certain voices into the room, then we should do so. And so I've worked in a couple of situations where there were spouses involved, and some of the unmarried next gens were a bit nervous. And also the spouses also had their own concerns as well about the family enterprise. And so my work was really to prep the family, like, there's some voices, there's some people we should be bringing into this conversation, a separate conversation. We can have a separate forum for the spouses, and also a separate forum for the next gen, inclusive of the spouses. But it's important to understand their lens, and also to address certain issues that they may have through misperceptions, because quite often what will happen is spouses love their spouses. So the in-laws love
I hope so.
the next gens typically. And usually negative perceptions of the business or the family is because, say, for instance, the next gen's been working in the family enterprise, is really stressed about something, comes home and offloads just negativity. Oh God, this happened. And God, you wouldn't imagine what dad did. You wouldn't imagine that this is happening. And so they have a very negative perception. And they haven't grown up with the parents to be able to moderate that negative perception with, well, mom's fine, mom's great, it was just a bad day I had, yesterday, or dad's great. They don't have that to balance out that negativity, and that takes the way they see the family and they see the enterprise. So it's really important to have a space and place to bring them into the room, to where they can share their perspectives. We can learn from that and see how we can make the family enterprise better as a result.
No, I think that's incredible. And in the book, do you talk about any entrepreneurship? And I know obviously people are now looking at ESG and all of those pieces. Are you, how are those pieces playing a role? Are they making it more complex or actually making it easier to have more harmony?
I touch on how the rising generation have different expectations of entrepreneurship, and also about how social impact is playing out and how philanthropy is playing out. And really, it's one of the lenses through which the next gen looks at, through which and says, my parents don't get it. That, I'm not really interested in working in this manufacturing business because it's, this is all brown energy and it's bad for the environment, or what's our role in empowering communities and things. But so it's again a point that can divide generations, but it's how can we then understand the other generation's perspective and start to co-create ideas together. So that's the lens through which I bring that up.
Yeah, because this is what, again, that perception, that assumption, there's a lot of assumptions that, I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? You haven't thought about certain things, and let's have the conversation, and then let's find a way so that we can co-create something that works for all, right? I mean, that's, and I know it's easier said than done from that perspective, but yeah, if we don't try, we will never know, right? Indeed. And so any other things you'd like to bring up that we haven't brought up yet? I mean, we have another 5 minutes. I want to really make sure that we get the most of it. And then of course we will read your book and give you feedback. I assume you're open to both ends of the feedback.
Of course, I'm open to. I've had negative feedback in the, with the earlier versions and drafts, and which was really helpful. Honestly, like you learn and you grow from constructive criticism. I think we've covered it all really. So it really speaks to the relational elements and speaks to the key success factors, which are clarity, communication, collaboration, and builds up families to this point of wanting to start their first family meeting. And like I mentioned, also speaks specifically to the nuances on the African continent and what, like the conversation we had the last time, what the world can learn from Africa and how can Africans also improve upon her natural advantages.
So let's maybe just a few minutes go into the Africa side. What are specific things that you are nudging those on the African continent to consider that they may not be doing that maybe a lot of the rest of the world is already doing? Is there any specific things that you feel we really need to wake up? I'm from the Congo, so we're not pointing fingers at any other space but ourselves, so we're good.
Just more deliberate planning, because of the nature of the volatility and how dynamic the environment is. It does lend itself to the fact that a lot of business owners will tend to just, let's wait and see what government will do. Let's wait and see what policy will be. Let's wait and see. But the waiting and seeing has a huge cost, particularly in an environment where there's so much volatility. So instead of waiting and seeing, how can we be more deliberate in our planning, particularly around diversification of our investments, and also considering other kind of assets or scope for investing beyond just property. There are other asset classes that would add great value, and thinking through very deliberately geography, asset type, industry, to really enhance the wealth portfolio of the family and protect the wealth portfolio of the family. That's a huge piece that I talk about. And that may entail like starting a family office, or it may not. And a family office, I say to folks, it doesn't have to have 6 members of staff on your payroll. A family office is just a structure where you're deliberate and intentional about managing your family wealth. It can be you and your private banker. It can be, you and your siblings can share roles amongst each other. It could be fully outsourced. It could be insourced. There's so many ways in which you can do things, but just being very deliberate and intentional about how you manage and you protect your family's wealth.
So it sounds like more about managing risk, right? That there's a risk that a lot of the other parts of the world, so it probably would be relevant also to parts of South America, I would assume.
Indeed.
Right?
Indeed.
And few countries maybe in Asia that are a little bit adventurous. But so that's what it sounds like. Because many of us from Africa, we create structures, etc. But we also want fluidity because we're so used to, implementing change as things occur, that we're very comfortable with change, right? So we don't want the rigidity. We don't want to be put into a straitjacket either, right? So that's, I guess, the balance that you're speaking about, but at least start and begin and build something so that if something were to happen, at least there's clarity or a foundation of direction, right?
Yeah,
which is what I'm hearing.
I'm not trying to take away from that entrepreneurial. I'm not trying to impose like this rigidity. I think that flexibility is great. And I think it leads to a lot of successful entrepreneurship. Yeah. But I'm just saying, just moderate it somewhat, like quite intentional, right? About if you have liquidity, you know, maybe implement a policy, whether it's X percentage of liquidity we will put towards a nest egg. And that has very little correlation with what's going on in the industry we're operating in, the family enterprise, and the geography we're operating in, to just add a little bit more protection. Yeah. Okay.
So last few words before we go, maybe a reminder, a quote, whatever you feel like.
Yes. One of my favorite quotes is by Peter Struppel. Legacy is not leaving something for people, it's leaving something in people. And when I think of that, I think it's about collective wisdom, collective intelligence, collective knowledge. And it's really about passing on this legacy of entrepreneurship through the triumphs of the individual members and their family and the business, but also the trials. And so creating this platform to have conversations is to create that very platform to learn from each other, so that we can pass on this legacy. So encourage you to get your copy. You can find out more information on www.nikeanani.com/book. There's a few sample chapters there, and there's a video also of me sharing more about the book, and also a link where you can get a copy from. So
we'll put all of that in the weekly in the weekly email we send out with the podcast and the webinar. So Nike, thank you very much. Again, congratulations to creating this incredible, birthing out this incredible piece of art, and look forward to reading it. I'm so happy to hear that you're bringing that individual work and then the family work and the sibling work, that partnership space, working towards that family meeting to create cohesiveness, communicate, to be in truth, create space, perspective. So I love it all. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm really happy from a family, space that you've written this book to help all of us to really, remind ourselves as we sit with various families in different situations. So thank you very much again, Nike. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Feisal. Thank you. So grateful.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us, and we'll be seeing you soon.